But on our side, we do operate some servers and infrastructure, and we try to be very efficient about that. So we, for example, use a lot of virtualization.
Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Amunabi, and today I'm joined by one of the experts in data center. And today we'll give us insight on how data center works. And also we shall be tackling the challenges on data center. So basically, this show actually addresses a student who are actually interested in technology and how this show can actually impact them generally in how they can advance their courses and actually have a very fair career in their life. So welcome, Mr. Spencer, to the studio.
Right. Okay. So, as you mentioned, my name is Kyle Spencer. I am the executive director of the Uganda Internet Exchange points, and I also coordinate the African IXP Association.
Okay.
And then on the side, I also do consulting work related to data centers. So between those three different roles, I interact a lot with the data center ecosystem in the region. And I've been in Uganda doing the Uganda Internet Exchange point for about 15 years now. So I've been in this space in the region for a little while.
And today will be very interesting to know how real data center works. So first of all, so there's been an appraisal of data center in the recent years since the introduction of the internet in Africa. And I'd like to know what are the driving factors of this particular success in the data center today?
Well, right. So the idea of a data center is that you need somewhere to host your equipment. In the old days, before large scale data centers started popping up like they have in the last 5 or so years, that was a lot of in-house server rooms in office buildings. That was telcos having their own data centers, ISPs, because they needed to host their own stuff. And then a lot of network operators had their own customers that wanted to host some of their enterprise systems, maybe didn't want to do it inside their own premises or whatever. But now what we're seeing is larger scale data centers, particularly carrier neutral data centers, which means data centers not owned by a network. And that's really important that they're not owned by a network, because if you're a bank or a network operator and you want to go in and host your equipment in a data center, you don't want to have to use, say, MTN's network to get there, or Safari, Safaricom or whatever. You want to have multiple options to get into the data center in terms of networks. You might need more than one internet service provider. You, as a network operator, might not want to peer at an internet exchange hosted in your competitor's data center, because it makes your competitor's data center more rich and powerful. And that's, there are competing interests. So, but the drive for data centers actually originates from network interconnection and internet exchange points, which is kind of the core of what I do. In the beginning, but if you go back like 20 years in our region, even if you only go back 10 years, we were on satellite connectivity, right? Or about 15 years now. 15, like in 2009, 2010, we got submarine cables in East Africa. I think East Africa was the last region on Earth outside of Antarctica connected to the internet via satellite. And so prior to 2009 and 2010, every network operator had its own satellite dish, which went to space. But the networks weren't always talking to each other locally. So if you hosted a website on one network and your user was on another network and wanted to see that website, then they'd have to go through space to get the website. So it was cheaper and faster to host in Europe than here. But once we started interconnecting networks locally, that meant that you could host websites and services in the country, which drove demand for data centers in the beginning.
There's been instance of machine learning and artificial intelligence being incorporated in data center facilities. How can you actually give an insight on that particular notion? Because it's one of the factors that actually enhance this particular revolution of these data centers.
Well, the thing that's really driven demand for data centers in our region in the first stages are getting enterprises out of their office buildings and into shared warehouses we call data centers, right? Because that's where the initial demand is the content and connectivity arising from enterprises, network service providers, and then cloud and content providers like Google, Facebook, Meta, whatever they are, Netflix. And then now, increasingly on top of that, the cloud service providers like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure are getting into the sort of AI machine learning games.
Uh-huh.
But for the moment, that's, I think, services that are available from their larger regions, like in the Middle East or in South Africa or in Europe. But gradually, they are expanding their deployments and what's available to us into the region. So Kenya is starting to see deployments from Microsoft, from Amazon and others. So it is possible now to get, I think, some basic infrastructure that allows you to do machine learning and AI related stuff locally in data centers here. But primarily the demand right now in our region for data centers in East Africa comes from enterprise and connectivity and content.
First of all, I have a question also, because now there's been also high demand of edge computing and the proliferation of the IoT. How, in terms of your company, what are the strategies that actually use in terms of meeting these particular demands?
Well, so as the Uganda Internet Exchange point, for example, we interconnect networks, and that creates low latency pathways between the networks and the services that they host. So that can include networks like Microsoft, Google, and others that run IoT platforms and services. So our role is really to facilitate a shorter, faster, cheaper path between the user and the thing that they want online, which in this case, in your example, is an IoT. So if you've got cameras in your house and you've got thermostats in your house and smart homes, or you're running a business that relies on this stuff and asset tracking or whatever, that might be phoning home to systems that are hosted in Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services. And in some cases, we facilitate the connection between your internet service provider and you to Amazon or Google or whoever hosts your platform.
There've been a rise of startups in Africa, and I'll need to know better advice. For example, if somebody wants to start its own company, do they need to have an on-premise data facility, or should they move to a colocation facility in a way that they can hire a premise and then they can put the data there? How can you leverage on that?
Well, it's a matter of resources. If you are a small startup and you don't have a ton of money and all you can afford is an internet service provider with a public IP address, then it might make sense to host a little server in your office. But if you have a bit more money and your needs are a bit larger, it might make more sense to go into a third-party data center where they can take care of managing the power and the air conditioning and everything else for you. So it's just really a matter of resources. But if you have the resources, it makes sense to go into some of these data centers, I think, like Raxio and iColo and the like.
Okay, very, very fantastic. So in terms of partnership, your company, do you have any open partnership with other data center entities?
Well, for example, in Uganda, my organization, the Uganda Internet Exchange Point, is inside Raxio, which is Uganda's first carrier-neutral data center. We are also in our own legacy facility where we've been since 2001. But when Raxio opened up a couple of years ago, it made sense for us to expand into that data center because our old facility doesn't really have the space to host a lot of the content and services that like to be near our internet exchange point. It's not a purpose-built facility. It's in an old office building downtown. Whereas Raxio, the new carrier-neutral data center, has tons of space and very reliable power. So if you know one of our customers, Facebook, wants to expand the infrastructure that they have in Uganda and they're in Raxio and we're in Raxio, they can do that right next to the internet exchange. So we are partnered with Raxio in Uganda. And that enables us both to support each other when we attract customers to the data center as an internet exchange point, and then they also have their own customer base, even independent of the types of interconnection services that we offer. And then once those customers are in the room, they might become customers of ours. And so together, a carrier neutral data center and an internet exchange point can kind of reinforce each other's growth. And so you'll find around the region, when data centers start popping up, they tend to work with internet exchanges, or in cases where one doesn't exist or can't be worked with, they start their own sometimes.
That is a very brilliant notion, because I really understand, for example, if a company or a data center doesn't have a rescaling of this particular facility, it may actually turn down the investors, the data users, so in a way that they can also move to the other particular company, which actually meaning that the company may lose revenue. That is very, very impactful. And so in terms of security, there has been a rising of security issues majorly on the users' data. How does your company actually have strategies in this particular notion?
Well, as a core internet infrastructure provider, we take security very seriously. It's important
Mhm,
for us internally in order to maintain the stability of our infrastructure and the service that we
mhm,
provide in Uganda. And actually, it affects more than Uganda. It's kind of a regional service now. But
mhm,
also, we are very privacy oriented personally, but also we carry that ethos into our organization. So, unlike some other internet exchange points in the region, we do not do any monitoring of our traffic, even in terms of the types of protocols going through. So, some internet exchange points, and maybe there's nothing wrong with this, look at the traffic flows going across the exchange and try to determine if any of that is malicious, or
mhm,
if it's HTTP, or if it's email, or where the traffic is specifically flowing to and from. And that can be very useful in terms of cleaning up your internet ecosystem. It can be very useful in determining traffic flows and threats and things like that. But we don't do that here in Uganda. We really would just rather not open that Pandora's box. We don't. We respect everybody's
mhm,
privacy to a very extreme degree, and we don't look at anything except the overall volume of traffic,
mhm.
which is just a
That is
basic way to
very
measure utilization.
okay. That is very fantastic. So, in terms of cooling and the heat management in your company, so you really understand that servers sometimes produce more light, more energy, that in a way that sometimes our hardware can burn up and actually even go trust. So, how are you having implementing this particular notion in a way that you can have a very effective cooling management system?
Well, so energy is a big issue for the data center industry right now, globally. And so there's a lot of efforts on building efficient facilities to host all this equipment and doing it in
Okay.
places where they can get renewable energy sources or cheap energy sources. But an internet exchange point, we are sort of inside the data center and don't always have direct control over that layer of efficiency and let's even say sustainability. But on our side, we do operate some servers and infrastructure, and we try to be very efficient about that. So we, for example, use a lot of virtualization so that we
Uh-huh.
don't have to run as much hardware in order to get as much out of it. So we can run multiple servers, if you will, on the same physical server, and that allows
Mhm.
us to make more efficient use of space and power, and so on. Um, yeah, that's the extent, generally the extent of how we deal with efficiency matters like that.
Okay, that is very fantastic. So another question is, how do data centers actually comply with government regulations in a way that they can keep the data become very much efficient in terms of legal access and all these particular notions?
I mean, if you're operating in the telecommunications space, whether you're a data center operator, internet service provider, or internet exchange point, we all do so under the graces of the government in the countries where we operate, and there are regulations and policies that vary by country and jurisdiction,
Okay.
and so it's often. I mean, we all do our best to comply. There's constant back and forth discussions about what the best regulation should be, and sometimes there's conflicting interests between the industry and the interests of the government and whatever. But I think in
Mhm.
our region generally there's a internet exchange points and data center operators and internet service providers have reasonably good relationships with the regulators. I mean, in some cases, I'm aware there's a fair amount of friction, but I think these days, what I'm seeing is more challenges related to tax and the cost of operations. Regulations play a role in that, but increasing taxes throughout the region are definitely putting some pressure
Mm-hmm.
on the information technology ecosystems more generally.
Yeah, that is very true because even in Kenya right now, there is a very high income. That means this high taxation on particular properties and actually entities. So another question is in terms of green energy, does your company incorporate this in its particular agenda?
Well, we don't have any specific policies around green energy because it's not something we have a ton of direct control over. Our power is provided by other entities. We're in somebody
Okay.
else's building who really has more control over that. We try to be efficient, but we are environmentally focused. We care very much about the environment, and in whatever ways that we can be
Mm-hmm.
efficient and sort of good citizens, we try to do that. But it's not an area where we have a ton of direct control, and so we don't have any specific policies around that.
So recently, there has been a shortage of skills in terms of expertise in data centers. So in your company or in your facility, do you have a career program that actually promote a skill set to new individuals?
Well, yeah. So I hear about this a lot. I was just at a data center conference a couple days ago, and one of the things that people bring up often is access to is the shortage of specific skills needed. And I mean, on some level, that's true because data centers are kind of unique things, and they're relatively new to the region. But on another level, I think the problem isn't always that we lack skills in our region. It's that people don't know how to find the people that do have the skills. You have to know how,
Mm-hmm.
like, where the right communities are and how to access these people, because there's actually a lot of people out there that are skilled, have a lot of talent, can do the job.
Uh-huh.
In Uganda, we have addressed this problem at the Internet Exchange Point by working closely with, for
Mm-hmm.
example, Makerere University. They've got some
Mm-hmm.
advanced networking and research labs there that we tend to pull people from. We also have a pretty
Mm-hmm.
vibrant online video gaming community. For example, the Gamers Nights guys here in Uganda, and occasionally when stuff comes up, those are good places to look. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we just try to stay on the ground, and if we need people or whatever, we know where to go in our own place. But I think internationally, when these data center investors come in, they don't really know how to tap into the talent pool in our countries because they're kind of from outside, and they aren't familiar with the community ecosystem, and so they're trying to find people on LinkedIn, and that's not necessarily the best place to find people.
Because first of all, I'm a graduate of IT, and also I understand how these particular things work. Because our certification in data analysis, in machine learning and AI, so actually getting that particular job is sometimes very tricky. But I think you've actually given a very proven note that actually we need to find the right community and people to speak to so that we can be able to get that particular role. So first of all, I'm very thankful for participating in this debate. And before we end the session, I have another question. So what are the main roles for somebody who is actually yearning to start learning this particular field in that particular data center?
That's a good question. In data centers are pretty commercial, and usually don't have enormous numbers of people on staff. But I would say
Mm-hmm.
if you want to get into data centers and you want to get into the internet industry, a good way to start is by volunteering. It's how I got into it and how a lot of people I know got into it. Just get involved in your local communities and start trying to lend a hand wherever you can, organize events. Just volunteer your time, and eventually through
Mm-hmm.
that exposure with the industry and the technology, you will gain enough experience and expertise to and
Mm-hmm.
visibility to get a job. I think that's a good pathway in, whether they're internships or whether you're just informally going up and saying, "Hey, can I help here?" Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I know volunteering takes time and everybody's got to eat and all that sort of stuff. But if you have the capacity, I think that's a really good way to get in. It's a very
Yeah, that is a
community
great.
driven ecosystem. So that kind of mentality and type of voluntary contribution is always appreciated and respected.
Okay, that is fantastic. I'll actually apply that notion in terms of getting those particular jobs and actually even improving my skill set. So basically, I have a question which I didn't put on the score sheet, but I'd like to ask. It's
Go
very
ahead.
disruptive. Right away, we have the introduction of the generative AI in terms of ChatGPT. Will this particular
Right.
force actually end jobs in Africa in terms of the technical skills?
That's a really good question. I think all over the world, as AI develops, it will
Uh-huh.
it'll threaten certain parts of the job market out there. I think my view is that it will cut down on certain jobs dramatically, particularly as this thing gets more powerful and more integrated into our society.
Mm-hmm.
It all depends on a lot of different variables. It depends on how governments regulate this thing. It depends on a lot of different factors. And then there's always people who argue that it'll create new jobs and whatever. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but it certainly appears to be very threatening to a lot of different jobs. Like I know I use it for things that I used to rely on other people for, whether it's managing
Uh-huh.
our company's social media or whether it's drafting legal contracts. You've always got to review this stuff and you got to treat it like an intern or whatever, and give it a human sanity check. But it just does things really quickly that people used to get paid for. Even just in ChatGPT's case. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so so I think it is an issue, but I would encourage. I don't know. I would encourage people to use it. Right. There's also this opportunity now to get more done in less
Yeah.
time, and then either with your free time you can continue to do more or take some time off in this temporary period where people still expect results on a human time frame. In the
Mm-hmm.
future, I think we're all going to be under pressure to produce more faster as everybody integrates AI and expects other people to use AI. Whereas now we've got this great little narrow window of time where people expect you to do things as a human, but you can turn around and use ChatGPT and get it done in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an opportunity here for a lot of people who want to be ambitious or just have a better
Uh-huh.
work life balance. So
Mm-hmm.
I encourage everybody to check it out and to understand it. And even if you don't believe in it or want to see it in society, it's good to know your enemy. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think it will undermine jobs. We've got huge unemployment in our region, and I think this might not help.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's a complicated question. I can't predict the future, but I do have concerns about
Yeah.
how it'll impact the job market, and I think we need to be. There was a great universal basic income test actually that just happened in Kenya. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we need to be looking at more globally as a society as technology automates a lot of jobs away. How are we going to eat if
Okay.
there are no jobs?
Mm-hmm.
Something we have to think about before it all falls apart in a raging fire.
That is very, very interesting. And actually, because this is actually sums up the end of the session, I'd like you now to share what your company offers and if there's any opportunity, because this will actually go over the internet and actually it will be important for you to share.
Right, right. So the Uganda Internet Exchange point, I probably should have described this in the beginning of the talk. We interconnect networks to each other. So we're just like a giant switch or a roundabout for the
Mm-hmm.
internet, and it keeps local traffic local. All the internet service providers and network operators and the Googles and Netflixes and whatever and so on connect to
Mm-hmm.
us to talk to each other through us. And that way, the traffic from Uganda for Uganda stays in Uganda. And it enables local hosting of content and websites and large scale content distribution for YouTube and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we offer network interconnection services. We're at 2 locations in the Kampala metro area, our legacy facility in
Uh-huh.
town, Raxio Data Center in Namanve. We are a
Mm-hmm.
small, lean little company. We have a website, uixp.co.ug, if you want to check out more about us or get in contact with us. We're on Twitter,
Okay.
etc. So, yeah, there's a great video on our website, actually. It explains it all in about 5 minutes.